Hello everybody, my name is Scott Klement. Welcome to the World of Node.js on IBM. This session is about the world of Node.js. It's meant as an introduction to the Node.js environment, and that is really what it's about. We're not going to talk too much about Profound's products relating to this at this point. We're just going to talk to Node.js in general. If you're not familiar with me, I am the Director of Product Development and Support at Profound Logic. So that's what I do, my day-to-day job. A lot of people, though, know me from other things I've done in the IBM community. I've published about 1,000 articles over the years. I'm also a big part of online communities such as midrange.com or Common. I'm also a speaker at many different user group events or other sort of speaking events, and I'm involved in open source on IBM. So that's what I do. As far as our webinar today, just a little bit of housekeeping I want to get out of the way before we start. First of all, it is being recorded. So after the webinar, if you weren't able to attend or you got interrupted and had to come away from your desk or whatever, it is being recorded, and you will receive a follow-up email explaining how to view the recording. So thank you for coming, and if you do miss part of it, you will be able to watch the recording afterwards. We also are going to try to answer some of your questions at the end of the session, but there's no need to wait till the end of the session. If you do have questions, in GoToMeeting there is a questions tab, which is what you see on the slide here. It's pointing to that, the big orange arrow there. If you go to that questions tab, you can ask questions at any time through the presentation, and please do use the questions area rather than the chat area. The questions area is where we'll be answering the questions. The other thing I would ask is that when the webinar is complete, we're going to send you a quick survey. And so we would appreciate it if you fill that out. That information is very helpful to us in organizing these and doing more of this kind of thing going forward. So welcome everybody. For this session, what I want to talk about, I mentioned up front, was the basics of Node.js. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about the kind of what it is, right? What is Node.js? And we'll talk about, a lot of people come to these things wondering if that's, the right environment for them to do their development in. So we'll talk about, how popular it is and the philosophy behind it. We'll also talk about some of the basics of it with a hello world type thing. But the main thing that I want to focus on is kind of the ecosystem, or as I call it, the world of Node.js, because to me that's what distinguishes Node from other environments. So to me that's kind of the most important is that ecosystem. And we'll demonstrate a couple of different things there. So what is Node.js? Just in the sort of basic level, it is JavaScript. It is the JavaScript programming language. But JavaScript, at least traditionally, is done inside of a web browser. So Node.js is the same thing, but outside of the web browser. If you think about it, it's using that same programming language, the same JavaScript language, but you're able to write just kind of regular applications that run on a computer. So, like for example, in RPG, we might write applications that do things like create reports and show screens and so forth. And so that's what this is about. It's doing that kind of programming as opposed to in the browser where you might do things like manipulate a web page. Here you're actually just doing regular sort of logic, like business logic or something like that. It's used for server-side applications, not client-side applications. Client-side would be the stuff in the browser. It was originally written for Linux back in 2009, but it's now available just about every platform you can think of. Obviously, the mainstream platforms such as Windows and Linux and Mac, it's available for all of those, and IBM, of course, which is why we got into it. But it's available for all sorts of platforms as well that you might not have thought of. For example, I've got on the slide HP Nonstop, which was something I hadn't even heard of before, and it has Node.js. So I mean, just about anything you can think of, you can get Node.js for it. And sort of some of the internals of it, of how it works. It works based on this event loop type paradigm, which I don't think we need to get into kind of the technicalities of how it works, but that's how it kind of works, and it kind of comes with code to let you do things like read and write files on hard drive and access the network and that sort of thing. But it actually doesn't have too much besides that. Most of it, of course, is stuff that you would add in, which is why I call this the world of Node, or the ecosystem surrounding it. So a lot of people come to this wanting to know about this because they want to code in the latest and greatest language. A lot of companies are maybe have an RPG background or a COBOL background on IBM I, and they want to go to something newer. So what I did here is I listed the programming languages that are kind of the most popular ones on the platform, and just to give you a comparison of how new they are. And nobody thought COBOL was new from 1959, right? But one of the things that might surprise you is RPG. So the version of RPG that we use today, I shouldn't say version, the RPG language we use today is called RPG4, and that is a separate language from RPG3 or RPG2. RPG4 was the fourth language that IBM created, and it was released in 1994. And then of course there's different versions of RPG4, but they're numbered things like 7, V7R2, V7R3, V7R4. So 1994, that's only 1 year older than Java or PHP or Ruby, and it's actually newer than Python. So if what you're looking for is really the latest and greatest, well, what is the newest thing on my list? Of course, it's Node.js. 2009 is significantly newer than any of the other environments we have on the platform. But it has been around for 10 years, so it's been around long enough that it's had a chance to become robust and to have learned the lessons and so forth of older languages, because it's newer, but yet it's still been around long enough that we know it'll be stable. All right. So comparing popularity of programming languages, this is kind of hard to compare how popular programming languages are, because a lot of people are off programming on their own shop, and they don't share what they're doing with the world that we can get statistics on it. But where we can get statistics is by looking at open source. So obviously in open source, what programming language something is written in, because you have the source code. It's open. So what this is, this chart is showing statistics from GitHub, which is the largest open source platform on the internet. And it's showing what they call pull requests, which are downloads of the source code for whatever reason somebody wants to get the source for. And you can see that JavaScript is not only the most popular, but it's twice as popular as any of the other ones. So 1.6 million downloads versus Java at 700,000. It's more than double. And Java and Python and Ruby are all pretty close, but then there's another kind of drop-off before we get to PHP. So looking at it that way, you can see that it's very popular, and that's one of the reasons that people are interested in this, is because it is so mainstream. If you think about it, you can think about why that would be. It kind of makes sense, because if people are programming web displays, and think about it, that's what people are doing. They're programming web displays. It's kind of like the standard display that everybody uses today is this web, for all programming languages. So if web is the standard web display across all programming languages, you're going to be coding in JavaScript, because that's the language of the web. So whether you're using any of the other things, Java, PHP, Ruby, Python, whatever, you're going to be coding JavaScript at some level anyway. Since you have to be coding JavaScript anyway, it's going to be the most popular language, so why not use it on the back end, on the server side, as well as on the front end? You get mastery of this language. It makes sense to use it in both places. So as far as other companies using it, it's not just my opinion. There are a lot of companies using it. So you can see a bunch of companies here, and these aren't small organizations. Walmart is among the world leaders in retail. You talk about things like entertainment. You've got people on here like Netflix, which are huge in entertainment, or in transportation. You've got Uber. In terms of financial, you've got things like Dow Jones. In news media, you get New York Times. So the giants of the world, if you will, are using this. And I've got this second slide here, which even shows more of the same thing. So you've got NBC, you've got Bank of America, you've got Cigna in healthcare, you've got Macy's in retail. So some of the largest companies in the world are using this, and so that can give you confidence that this is something, you know, that people are using. Another way to look at the popularity is to look at it in terms of what's happening in the job market. So this chart is showing over time the growth in the number of jobs available for different programming languages. And you can see at the top I've got PHP, Ruby, Rails, Python, Java, Scala, and Node.js on there. And for the most part, they're pretty much a solid line across the bottom. There's a little bit of activity as things have grown over the years, but for the most part, that's what you see. Scala is a little bit of extra growth there, but you can see that Node.js is the one that's soaring, that purple line that's kind of taking off to 120,000% job growth. So that's another way of looking at how popular this environment is. All right, so hopefully I've convinced you that it's a popular environment, a mainstream environment. What about the philosophy? You know, so if you started to learn it, one of the things that you kind of have to understand up front is the philosophy. And the philosophy of this is that it includes very little. If you think about languages like RPG or Java, they try to include kind of everything in the language. We've got an RPG, we've got built-in database, we've got built-in printer support, you know, kind of everything is built in. But Node actually takes the opposite approach. They build in very little as possible. And so that's, you know, that's done intentionally, because the idea here is that in order to build an application, what you're going to do is download modules that do the various things you need to do, and you'll combine those modules to make an application. So that really is what distinguishes Node from other environments. And I kind of think of that very much like the Unix philosophy. If you've ever worked at the Unix command line, you know, you've got one command to list the files. You've got one command to sort, you know, any block of text sent to it. One command to filter that text. And you can combine these. You can list the files in a directory and then sort it, and then filter out things you don't want and stuff by combining the tools together. So it's that kind of philosophy of writing things that do one thing and do them well, and then make them so that they can be combined. And that's what, you know, Node is based around. It's based on this idea that you can download these modules and use them to build your application. You don't have to write everything, because there's, you know, hundreds of thousands of free modules available that you can download and use them. That's what I mean when I refer to the Node ecosystem, or the world of Node.js, is that, you know, ability to get all this stuff and combine them to do what you need to do. Now, of course, this is supported on IBM I, and the way it works on IBM I is IBM has this package system called Yum that you can install, and you can Google that. You'll find, you know, examples of how to get that set up on your system. And then Yum is a package manager that you can use to install Node.js and other open source tools. And so once you've got it, and then it runs in the PACE environment. It does provide access to the native database. IBM provides a tool called the IDB connector. So you think about that I for IBM I and DB for database. So it's the IBM I database connector. And it's just another one of these modules that you can combine to make your application, and that gives you database access. And of course, there's also access for other types of modules out there as well, like maybe you want to access a SQL Server database, you can get a module for that. If you want to access, you know, whatever it is you want to do, they've pretty much got a module for everything. The source code for it is kept in the IFS. You can use any editor that edits text files to edit that. RDI actually works very well. If you want a free option because you don't want to pay for RDI, something like Notepad++, that's a free editor available for Windows. You can download that and use that. It works very nicely with Node.js. We like Visual Studio Code, or VS Code, here at Profound Logic. We use that a lot. So that's another free tool that's based on Microsoft's Visual Studio, but it's an open source tool that's free from Microsoft that you can get and use that to edit your source code. So there's lots of ways to go about editing it. And it can be integrated with IBM I using, there's a tool called XML service that IBM provides that can be used to do things like run programs and access objects. Of course, Profound provides options for that as well, which are even better, but I didn't want to get into that today. The demand for this actually comes from the development community, which I always thought was really interesting. When I sit down and think about it, you know, there's companies like Zend, or now it's RogueWave, who is actually making money off of selling PHP on IBM i. There's other companies out there like PowerRuby that are profiting from Ruby on IBM i. Well, who is profiting from Node.js on IBM i? And the answer is really nobody. The only reason we have it, the reason that it's brought to the platform, is because the developers are demanding it. So think about that. To me, that's very interesting. The fact that, you know, developers, us, you know, the people who write the programs, really want this. To me, that's very interesting. All right, so as far as how to learn the language on any platform, I obviously don't have time to teach you a whole programming language here. We've only got a short amount of time to talk about it today. But I do have some links here. So there's some books, Sam's Teach Yourself Node.js in 24 Hours by George Ornbow, or Pro Node.js for Developers by Colin Ehrig. So I got links here. If you go to my website, you can get the handout for this session. You can click those links to go and download those books if you like. And kind of the reference manual, if you will, for Node.js is the Node.js website itself, so nodejs.org. But usually what I find myself doing is simply just Googling for what I want to find. That's one of the nice things about it being a mainstream language, is you can just Google for whatever it is you're looking for. So I wanted to show a hello world example, but I thought, you know, rather than show you one line of code to just print hello world, it would be interesting to make a web server as an example. So to find out about that, I can just Google. I can just Google for the HTTP module for Node.js. It actually comes with Node.js as part of the networking support. So if I switch over to Google, I can search for Node HTTP module, you know, and it's very easy to find it and find the documentation for it. And I'm not going to, you know, there's a lot here, and I'm not going to try to read it during the session, but you can go through here and you can see examples of things, and, you know, the sort of reference manual, if you will, for this tool. And I didn't have to have a book or leaf through it or find things in a table of contents. It was just a matter of Googling it, and you can see how easy that is. It's kind of the nice thing about it being so mainstream. All right, so this is the hello world that I wanted to put together. Again, what I did was I used that HTTP module, and if you went to that documentation, it says that you have to require it. Require is a Node.js function that you call to load in a module. So you can kind of think of that as being like binding a module in RPG, or binding to a service program in RPG. It kind of loads in a given Node.js module into your application. So it required it, and then I got back a JavaScript object called HTTP server, which I can use to do things. So I can do HTTP server.create server. That creates an HTTP server. And what will happen then is, once I've created my server, I'm going to skip this code here for now, and I'm just going to tell it to go ahead and listen on a port. So whenever it receives a connection on a port, it's actually going to be running this in the background, and whenever it receives a connection on a port, it's going to run something. And that's what this function is that's passed to create server. That's what it runs when the connection comes in. So that's not run immediately, it's run when, you know, a connection comes to the server. So I created the server, I told it to listen on a port, and then I printed a message on the screen saying, hey, the server's running, and I just put a note saying how to connect to it. And then my code actually ends. And that's kind of interesting if you think about it, because if this were something like an RPG program or a CL program, COBOL program, whatever, when it got to the end, the program would actually stop. But in Node.js, it doesn't. In Node.js, it'll keep running as long as there's something for it to do. So since I've told it to listen and accept connections from things, up here, it will stay running. Even though it got to the end of the code, it'll stay running. So that's kind of how that works. And then when somebody does connect to it, it will run this function. And then what the function does is it tells the browser what type of data it's sending. So content type, text HTML means I'm sending you HTML text. And it just sends a one-liner HTML document that says hello world. And the H1 just means it's a heading, so it'll be bigger and bolder. And then I just printed on the screen, printed response sent, just to show that it did something to someone who's watching, you know, from the side where it's running. I actually have that commented out in the real program though, because that got annoying at printing response sent all the time. But that's what it, that's what that was for. So I've got that all set up on my IBM I. So if I wanted to, I could log on to my IBM I. Here we've got a 5250 screen. And if I type, call QP2 term, that gets me into the PACE environment. And I've got all my stuff in it called World of Node, so I'm going to switch over to there. And in that directory, I've got this hello program. The code that we just looked at is called helloweb.js. And the way that you run it is node followed by the name of whatever you're running. So helloweb.js in this example. And I'll run that, and it should now start that up. And you can see it printed the message. I've got it with my actual system name in there. And so then I can go ahead and connect to that in the browser. You'll notice that I have not come back to the command line. It's still waiting for that to run. So I opened it up on the browser just by clicking the link on the emulator, and you can see it printed hello world on the screen. So that's really all there is to it, right? To make a hello world program. And I'm going to go ahead and kill this, and I want to show you that even though I'm running this in a 5250 screen, you can see that I'm on IBM I. It's actually better to run it in like a Unix type terminal. So I've got a Unix terminal here. I've logged on to the IBM I already in advance, and I'm sitting on my system. My system's called Power 8. That's why I have it printed in that, so I can remember what system I'm on. I've already switched to the World of Node directory, so I can go ahead and do the same thing in this terminal. And then again, I'm still on the IBM I. This is, still running the IBM I. It's just using a Unix terminal instead of a 5250 terminal, and you can see it does the same thing. And of course, if I were to display it in the browser, it would show the same thing as well. So no point in looking at that again, but hopefully you get the idea. All right, so that's what I've got on this next slide, is showing you how to run this in 5250 and how to connect to it with the browser, which we did. I did a real live example of. But then I also show you how to set up a terminal program and get a real Unix terminal. So the terminal that I like to use is called Putty. It's a free open source terminal, and I've got the link there to where you can get it. You can download the handout from my website, and you'll have that link. And then I start the IBM I SSH server, which gives you an encrypted logon to IBM I, and then you just configure Putty to connect to it. And once you connect, you'll get the screen like this, like I was having, and then you can run it just like I did and showed you. But you can actually use any Unix terminal. Putty is just an example that I like. So there's lots of options out there. All right, so that was a quick hello world and a basic introduction to Node.js. But what I want to show you now is what I feel like is the distinguishing thing about Node.js, which is this ecosystem. It's all of these free packages that you can get and combine together to build your application. And these are managed with a tool called the Node Package Manager, NPM. And what it does is it allows you to find and install these applications. So this is a listing of the commands that NPM provides. So NPM is just a tool that you install. It comes, it'll be installed with Node.js when you install it through Yum. And then in the paste command line, you type NPM followed by whatever it is you want to do. So npm list would list the packages you have installed. Npm install followed by a package name would install a package. You can also upgrade a package you already have. You can uninstall a package. You can search the package repository for something you want to install. When you do these things, you can also do -- global, which means you want to install it globally, meaning it'll be available to everyone on the system or everywhere on the system, versus installing it locally, which is the default, in which case it'll install it into the directory you're working in and into the application that you're working in. And I prefer doing that as much as possible, install it into the application you're working with, because then Node and NPM will keep track of the fact that it is a dependency of your application, and when you upgrade things, it'll upgrade all of the dependencies, and if the dependency is out of date, it'll let you know, and so on. All right, so that's what NPM is all about. I liken it to something like an app store or the Play Store for your mobile devices. It's not a perfect analogy, but it's a tool for managing the different packages that are available. So you can do things like find a package, install a package, keep it up to date. the same kind of things that you would use something like an app store to do. So that's kind of what it is, except it's kind of a nerdy one, right? It's for computery people like us, where we're, installing a part of a program, a module to use in a program, and it's, done at the command line and stuff like that. So think of it as a kind of a nerdy version, if you will, of an app store. So let's look at an example of that. What I wanted to do is show you an example of a web server. We did a very simple one where we wrote the web server ourselves using the HTTP support provided with Node, but that would be very difficult if you were doing a full-blown web application, because you'd have to write everything. You'd have to write code to read files from disk and write them back out to the screen and stuff like that. It would be nice to have a full-fledged web server. So the most popular full-fledged web server that I'm familiar with is called Express. And so I went ahead and Googled it. Again, the quickest way to find information is to Google it. And what I'm doing is I'm looking for the NPM page for Express. And this is very handy when you're looking at packages and you want to, find a package that does what you want. You go ahead and you click on it, and it'll tell you about that package. So in this case, Express, and there's some pretty interesting stuff here about Express, like it shows that it's been downloaded 42 million times in the past month. So you can see this is pretty widely used. 42 million downloads in the past month, 9.8 million downloads in the past week. You can see that this is doing automated testing. It's testing it on Linux and Windows, and it's passing its test, and it's got 100% code coverage when it's doing that. So if you don't know what package you want to install, this is really handy, because you can go and you can search for this stuff, find the NPM pages, and you can look at it and see, how widely used is this? Is it being tested? You can also see an example of how to use it. In this case, you bring in the Express module with require, and then you go ahead and you set it up, and this is setting up for a GET request at a given URL, and this is what it's going to do when it gets that, and so on. So it gives you a quick sort of information about that. So lots of information here that you can use to decide, is that the module you want? And if it is the module you want, you can see here's the command you would need with NPM to install it. You just type that in your paste command line in IBM I to do that, to have it installed. All right, so that's the basic idea. Now, when I was looking at this, I thought to myself, I like Express, but I don't know if I want to code all of this to get the server running. Well, what I found searching around is there's actually an Express generator tool, which can generate a whole sort of setup the way you might want it to use. So it sets up Express and generates a web server setup that you can then just put your own logic into. So to install that, it would be npm install express generator, and I installed mine globally, so I added -- global, and that installed it on my system, and then I could use it to generate an Express setup. So let me show you an example. I've got this stuff installed already, so I'm not going to have to download Express or Express generator. But then once I've got it, I can type Express followed by the name of my directory or name of the application. I usually name the directory after the application, and it will generate a setup. So I can do Express and then followed by the name demo app in this example, and it'll generate that. I also like to use this -e, which allows it to use a templating engine for HTML of encapsulated JavaScript. So that's what the -e is, and I'll show you doing it in an actual command here. So I'll type express -e, and I'll just call this webinar, since we're doing it for a webinar, and it'll go ahead and it'll generate this application for me. So it's generated a configuration for Express, and it's generated all the directories and so forth for it. If I switch to that webinar directory that I just created, I can see the files in it, and I'm just using the Unix commands to list the files, and you can see what we've got there. And you see we've got directories for views. That would be like the HTML pages, the screens that you would show to people. Routes, which is the code that you will write that handles different URLs and so on. Public is where you put just static files that you want to be able to download, so things like images or HTML files and so on. All right, so that's the basic idea behind Express. And I've got one set up and configured for me. So I went ahead then and I made modifications to this because I wanted to show you like a business app So I made modifications to this, and I'm just going to copy them in. So you don't want to watch me code it all over again. That would be a case of mistakes made while you wait type of thing. So I'm going to go ahead and copy them in. I've got them in a directory called Express Demo, and I've got an app.js, which is the app.js that the generator made with my modifications. So I'm just going to copy that over that one. And then I've got something to show a list of orders, so I decided to call it orders dot. And so we've got an orders.js, which is a route. And so I'm going to copy that into the routes directory. And the idea is, and I'll show you how this is set up in a minute, but we'll set up a URL to point to that JavaScript code, that orders.js, and then that's where our business logic will be run. And then the business logic will want to put out a web page showing the output of our program, and I used encapsulated JavaScript or EJS, and I also called that orders. So orders.ejs in this case, and I'm going to put that in the views directory because it's a view, it's a screen. So that should be it. Those are my modifications. Now, it's important to understand that when I did Express Generator, it set up it generated an example of using Express, and I made some modifications to it, but there's also a bunch of dependencies, right? Things that this needs, like all sorts of modules that make up Express itself. So NPM knows how to deal with all of that. And if I type npm install, it will go and it will get all of those dependencies and set them up on my IBM I for me. Right, and you can see it's getting them, it's telling me about them. You can see it's showing a little bit of progress chart here, and that, by the way, these colors in the progress chart, that's the reason I want to use a real Unix type terminal. Now this would work if I had done it on IBM I in a 5250 terminal. In the 5250 terminal would just kind of show garbage characters around the different colors and stuff like that, so it would look pretty awful, but it would still work fine. But I'm connected to my IBM I now with a real Unix terminal, and of course, because this is Unix software, it knows how to do the coloring and stuff like that you would expect to have on Unix, and that's why I like to use that. It makes things look nice. Now I've got an older version of the Express generator, and it's using some of the older modules that it found security problems in, and that you can see that on the screen. It found some vulnerabilities. Some of them are even high vulnerabilities. But again, this is the advantage to using NPM. Not only does it manage the packages for you, but it tells you when they're out of date, and it tells you when there's security problems. So I can go ahead and fix these with NPM. I can just say, I want to install fixes by saying npm audit fix. So npm audit tells me what vulnerabilities might be there, and fix tells it to fix those vulnerabilities. So I'm going to tell it to force install any things that it needs to do, and it's going to go ahead again and get this stuff all up to date and get rid of these vulnerabilities. And that message is just telling me that there's a new version of NPM available. Apparently that wasn't there yesterday, so that must have just come out. But anyway, now that I've done that, it should have everything up to date. And if I type npm audit, it'll now tell me if there's any more problems with this code. And you'll see that it's not. Everything's fixed. There's 0 vulnerabilities. So that's really cool, isn't it? That's really the power of NPM, that it can keep all this stuff up to date. It finds problems and lets you solve them and stuff like that. I'm also going to install that IBM database connector, IDB connector. So I'm going to type npm install IDB connector, and I'm going to install that into this webinar project that I'm created. Anyway, while it's installing that, let's go back to the PowerPoint part of this and get caught up here. So I showed you these things, creating an application and so forth. And then I'm installing the IBM database connector, IDB connector. And what this is a module that we can use from Node.js to access the IBM I database. So what I'm doing here is requiring it, which again brings in the module. Think of it like binding in ILE, brings in the module, and then I can use it in my application. It returns something that I decided to call db2i, which is just short for db2 for I. And then I'm going to use that to create a new connection. So this new db2i dbcon is creating a new database connection object, which I can use to connect to the database and set attributes of the database and stuff like that. So that's what I'm doing. Next line is connecting to the local database, so the database on the same machine. And you can also do things like set things about your connection. So for example, in embedded SQL, you know that we can set our naming to *sys for system naming, or *SQL for SQL naming, which allows you to have like the library followed by a slash for system naming, followed by the table name, whereas SQL naming would be library followed by a dot followed by the table. So with system naming, we can have the slashes, I guess, that we're used to. So that's what this line of code is doing. It's setting the system naming attribute to true. And you'll see those are all part of this module, so they're prefixed with the db2i that I named it up here. And so that's going to set it to system naming. It's just as an example, and there's lots of other attributes you can set as well. Once you've got that all set up the way you like it, you can go ahead and use this to run an SQL statement. So I'm telling it to create a new statement object here by saying new db2i database statement. I'm telling it which connection to create the statement under. That gives me a statement JavaScript object, which I called STM, just short for statement. And then I can use that to execute something. So here I just built a character string that's a select statement. It's selecting these columns from the sales detail table. And then I can use that statement to run it. So I say statement.exec, which means execute, and I pass in the character string to execute, and that will run the SQL statement. Now it's important to understand that that's actually going to happen in the background. So it's going to do all the database logic in the background, and then my program is just going to continue. So you can think of it like submitting a job. It's running in the background. When it is complete, it will run this function that I passed as a parameter to statement exec. All right, so this function is going to run when the database data comes back, and any logic that I'm going to do based on that will run in here. It will get a parameter which I called result here, which is the result set, if you will. It's the list of rows, and that'll come back as a JavaScript array, and in the array will be an object containing the fields. So I'm getting back this array called result, and then I'm doing result.forEach to loop through all of the rows, or all of the records, if you will, that are returned by the select statement. And then I'll have one record returned by each forEach call. So forEach will call a function, and what forEach does is it loops through all of the elements in an array. So for each array element, it'll call this function and pass one row of data from my database, or one record, if you like. And then row will have fields for each column that I selected from my select statement. So row.orderRef, because I listed orderRef up here, row.orderLine, because I listed orderLine up here, and so forth, will be filled in with the data from my database table. All right, so that's how you do database access using Node.js, using the IDB connector. All right, so with that in mind, let me show you what I did in my Express setup. So we installed Express, and I said I copied in my app.js. Well, this is the app.js, and most of this was generated by the Express generator. But you'll see some things that I added in here, like this connection up here. It requires the IDB connector, and it connects to the database. And I'm telling it to use system naming, just like I did on the slide. Further down here, I'm telling it to require the orders file. So remember, I had an orders.js file that I copied into the routes subdirectory. Well, this is telling it to go into the routes subdirectory and bring in that orders.js. And you can leave the .js off, because .js extension is the default. So this brings that module in and calls it orders. And then again, most of this was generated by the generator, but down here I say app.use and I say /orders. So this is saying when there's a URL of /orders passed to the server, I want it to use that orders module that I required above. So that's what's going to call my orders code. So that's the basic idea. You've got this code that's all generated. You just add in the lines to do these things. The orders.js looks like this, and what this basically does, I mean, it's doing some requires up here to bring in modules, but the main thing is when it's a GET request, it's going to call this function, a GET request that has this after /orders in the URL, which is really nothing. It's going to create an SQL statement. Here I didn't list out the fields, I just did select star from the sales detail table, but it's the same thing, right? So it's running that SQL statement. And then for each row for the whole set of rows that it gets back from that statement, it's going to call this. This is a routine that's part of Express that tells it to render a view. So it's going to render the orders view, which is that orders.ejs file that I copied into the views directory, and it's going to pass in something called rows, and rows is being set to RS, RS being short for result set, which is what I was receiving from the SQL statement up here. If you look at the orders EJS, you can see that this is a template. So it's a template for an HTML page, and I'm bringing in some frameworks to make the page look nice and so on. But it's pretty much HTML code. But then we can also break into some what we call encapsulated JavaScript or EJS code. So when it uses less than % there, we're breaking into JavaScript code, and it's able to then do a for each on that the thing called rows that we got, which was that result set from the SQL statement. And for each row, then it's inserting HTML code that has these database fields. All right. So that's pretty much the whole thing. That's all the modifications I made. And we can go ahead and try it out. So to try it out, I'm going to go back to my my terminal session here, and I'm going to do npm start. Well, actually, I need to change the default port number is one that we normally use for other things on at Profound Logic. So I'm going to change the port number to 9876, and I'm just going to do npm start, and that will start up my Express web server. So I've got the full Express web server now that's running, and if I go to that, which is on my Power 8, which is what we named our IBM I, and go to the port number 9876, that's giving me the basic Express web server. If I change the URL to have /orders at the end, it should run that route that I added, and you can see that it did. And this is querying my sales detail file and showing it on the screen in a, like a table. So I think that's pretty nice. That was all it took to write this, and this is just using a little JavaScript framework that allows me to automatically do things like sort the different columns by clicking on them. It's got a search option, so for example, if I only wanted to show things that had the word box in them, I could search for that, and it would filter it down to just things that have the box in them, and so forth. But as you can see, it's it's a business application like something you might write, but it's not too terribly hard to code that and get that all set up and going. All right, so that's an example of a web application, but I thought it's important to understand that Node.js isn't just about web. Node.js can do all sorts of things. Express is one module that you can pull in, but there's a whole ecosystem of things that you can pull in. So what if I wanted to output like an Excel spreadsheet instead of a web page? So to find out about that, I went and I Googled Node.js Excel spreadsheet. I found lots of different options. There's lots of Excel tools out there. I clicked on the NPM page for each one and looked at it. What does it look like? How many people are using it and so forth? And I found this Excel.js tool, and I got the command from the NPM page to install it, which was, install Excel.js. And then it also told me how to use it on that NPM page, and you can see how we do it. We require it like anything else. We create a new Excel workbook. If you're not familiar with that term workbook, that's like the whole Excel document is a workbook. And we think of it as a spreadsheet, but a spreadsheet is actually just one tab in Excel. You can have multiple spreadsheets in a document. So a workbook is all those sheets put together. So this creates one workbook and then adds a spreadsheet or a worksheet to it, and then so that'll be a tab at the bottom, and I called it orders. And then the nice thing about Excel.js is it had this ability to configure the columns as just a JavaScript array. So you can see I'm creating an array, worksheet.columns. I'm setting it to an array. That's what the square bracket means. And in the array, we've got these JavaScript objects. Think of an object like a data structure. It's one field that has subfields inside of it. So it's got a subfield for header, and that'll be the heading that goes on that column in my report, in my Excel spreadsheet. Key is which field to pull from. So when I'm adding rows, it's going to take this from the order reference field in my row. I can set the width of the column as well. The second column is called the line number. I'm setting the width as well at that. But I'm also setting a style because order line is a numeric field. And I'm telling it that I want to show a 0 in there instead of blanks if my order line is 0. So I'm able to do a numeric format. I'm doing the same thing with the rest of these things. I'm setting them up and I'm setting the width so that it'll be the right width in Excel. I'm doing the number formatting for ordered quantity also with that 0. But just to show a more sophisticated example, because these are all kind of very simple examples, When I did the sales total, I wanted to show something with a little bit nicer formatting, because sometimes that can be a negative number. So I did a number format that puts a $sign in front of the total. It puts commas every third digit in there. It'll show 1 0 to the left of the decimal place, but only 1. The rest will be blank if it's not, you know, if they would have been 0. And then that's for positive numbers. And then the semicolon separates the positive numbers from the negative numbers, and I wanted the negative numbers to show up in red and to have parentheses around them and do that same kind of formatting. So all of this is according to Excel's number formatting rules. You can look that up in your Excel spreadsheet. You can look under custom formats in there and you'll learn how to do all that. And you can just put it in here and you can do all that same stuff in Excel.js. Also, just to show you doing one more modification to my spreadsheet, something you couldn't do with like a CSV file, I'm grabbing the first row of the spreadsheet, so the whole row, I'm doing get row, and then I'm changing the font. I wanted the font to be bold, so I'm setting it to this Calibri size 11, and I'm making it bold so that it looks a little bit more like a heading. So you can do all that to set things up, and then just to add a row, you just do worksheet.addRow and you pass in the JavaScript object, which again, an object is like a data structure. It's got all these fields inside of it. So you pass that in, and that's one row or one record that's added on to the sheet. And then which column or which field goes in which column is based on the key that was in that last slide. So that's what I'm doing here. I'm doing another SQL statement, and for each row, I'm adding that row in. The only trouble we ran into with that was that the numeric fields were coming back from the IBM database as character, and the number formats weren't applying. So what we did to work around that was we took the number fields and we forced them into numeric fields just by using JavaScript's built-in ability to cast something as a number, and then we're taking that numeric version and putting it back in there so that when it adds the row down here, these will be forced to be numeric, and therefore the number formats will apply. So anyway, it runs through the whole SQL statement, adds all those rows, and creates the spreadsheet, and that's it. And when I'm done, I just tell it to write it to the IFS, and it'll just write, orders.xlsx to the IFS. So just to demonstrate that real quick, let me exit my Express server here. I've got that in a directory called makesheet. I think it was called makesheet. Let's see, what's it called? Oh, it's called Excel.js, sorry. And then the program's called makesheet, and if I go ahead and run that makesheet.js, it will do the database query and generate the Excel spreadsheet just like I showed you on the slide. And now if I list the files, you'll see I've now got that orders.xlsx file in there. And in fact, if I wanted to then view that, I could open that up using Windows. I just got a drive map to my IBM I, and I can double click on that Excel spreadsheet. And it'll take a minute here, but it'll open up in Excel. So there it is. I can zoom in to make that a little bit easier to see. But yeah, it opened it up in Excel, and you can see the different columns have different widths according to my formatting, which made it look really nice. The top line is in bold to make it look nice. You can see how negative numbers are formatted in a special way. They've got the parentheses and the red formatting and stuff like that. And of course, I'm just scratching the surface. There's lots of stuff that we can do to make a really nice spreadsheet. So that's, something I got for free. It was just a quick download off the internet. Now, of course, you might not, want to have, well, I'll get to that in a minute. The other thing I wanted to mention is a lot of people have asked me, as I'm talking about this stuff, how to debug programs in Node.js. For some reason, people seem to think that there wouldn't be a debugger like there is in RPG, but there's actually multiple debuggers out there, and they're actually nicer than the ones in RPG. So one of the built-in features of Node is the ability to do remote debugging so that I can run this on the IBM I, but I can debug it from my PC. And that's done by using something called inspect. So if I do Node and then I pass it a switch of inspect, that tells it I want to do debugging, and then I can set it to an IP address and port number that I can connect to with a remote debugger. Or I can do inspect-break, which means it'll automatically set a breakpoint at the first line of code so that the code doesn't run right away. It waits for the debugger. and then of course the name of the program you want to run. And then you can set up your debugger to point to that. So if you're using the VS Code to do the debugging, which is what I typically do, I can create a profile that says attached to my IBMI. I can give it the IP address of my IBMI, and I can give it a port number. This would be the same IP address and port number that I would have provided to the inspect switch on the last slide. And when I run this, then I get the debugger, and I can step through my code. I can view variables and all of that stuff. All right, I'm not going to go into demonstrate because we're just about out of time, but I wanted to just let you know that that is available. The other thing I wanted to say is with regards to the Excel example, what I find that this is really useful for is replacing stuff like daily reports, weekly reports, monthly reports, quarterly or yearly reports. At least a lot of the shops that I've talked to will do like a big batch process, so they print lots of reports like that. And I found one thing that works really well is to generate those reports into the IFS and then email it to the people who are interested in the reports. So that they get it automatically. Plus, you don't have to worry about having a map drive and stuff to view the Excel document. So again, I wanted to do that in Node.js. I went and I Googled it, Googled Node.js send email, found lots of different email tools. I clicked on the NPM page for each one to see which ones that I like, which ones that I not like. I like this one called Node Mailer. I found the command to install that, and then you just tell it, point it to your outgoing web server, or not web server, email server. And it will, use that to send mail. So if you're using the built-in server on IBMI, it would just be localhost. If you've got something like an Exchange server on your network, it can be just, the name of that server, whatever it is. If you need a user ID and password to log in, then it's just in the URL, you put that user ID and password. So you could put your user ID followed by colon, followed by the password, and then at the server that you're connecting to, and that's what it does. So the way that you then send an email once you've got it connected to your server is to create a little object like this. So this message object just has fields for the from address, the to address that you want to send to, the subject line, and then the message itself in HTML format. So I just put a quick message saying sent from Node.js on IBMI. And then attachments is just files to attach, so I'm attaching that orders.xlsx file. So once I've created that little data structure, or object as it's called in JavaScript, I can say transporter.sendMail and pass that object in. That's got the from and to address and the attachments and everything else, and it'll go ahead and send that mail. And then that again runs in the background. When it's complete, this function will run, and I can check. In this case, I checked to see if there was an error. If there was an error, I printed it on the screen. If there wasn't any errors, I just let the program end. I didn't print anything if it was successful. All right, so if I went ahead and ran that, you'd see it would run, and it would send the email. It's not that interesting to watch because it doesn't print anything unless there's an error. But then I could open up the email in my, whatever my email client is, and I'd have that spreadsheet, and it would say sent from Node.js, and then I can double-click on the spreadsheet to view it. All right, so just because of time, that's what I'm going to show you is those things. My kind of final thoughts on that is it's a really powerful language, and it's really cool that we can just get these free tools and combine them to make our application. It's such a powerful environment because of that. NPM makes it easy for us to install the tools, to keep them up to date, and so on and so forth. And you can then take these tools and make them do whatever you want to do. And the only thing you have to worry about is the business logic that's unique to you. All right, so you can download a copy of this from my website. It's scottklement.com/presentations, and then you'll get the whole thing. So go ahead and go to that. If you're going to write down anything from this session, that should be it. That's scottklement.com/presentations. Now, one of the things that Profound offers is a free website where you can try Node.js out. It's called noderun.com. It's completely free, which people don't believe that when I say that, but it is. It's completely free. You can sign up and you'll get Profound's tools for working on applications, and you'll also get access to just write Node.js applications in general, and you can just try them out. Now, of course, for a real business application, you'll want to install it in your IBMI and run it there, but for just playing with it and checking it out, it's a really nice little tool. So noderun.com, check that out, completely free. It's all running in the cloud. All right. So again, that's it. Check your email, and we will give you a recording of this so you can watch it on demand. And there'll also be a survey that is sent to you when you exit this, so that you can fill out that information. And that information is really helpful to us, so I do appreciate it. All right, so we're up to questions here. We're running out of time, but we'll try to answer a couple of questions here. Let's see what we've got. A lot of the questions are about technical problems with GoToWebinar. So one of the questions was, is it possible to run Node.js from a web server like PHP? And it is a little bit of different philosophy with Node versus PHP. PHP, generally you'd run a web server like Apache, and then it would be, the PHP would be kind of like a program called from it. And you can do that. You can set up Apache and have it go over to Node, but the more typical setup would be to have something like Express, like I demonstrated, where Express is actually itself a Node.js application that calls your code that's added in. That's the more typical way of using Node.js in a web server type of environment. Let's see, can Node.js be used for system-to-system communications, such as to another IBM connecting to another IBM or to AIX? So the kind of the most popular way of doing that sort of thing today is by using what's called web services or microservices, and Node.js certainly has web service capabilities available to it. So you could set that up and just make calls that way. That's kind of the best way to do that sort of thing. It does have built-in support for most of the standard internet protocols as well. So if you wanted to use something like HTTP or FTP or a remote procedure call type thing, most of that stuff, it would be no problem at all from Node.js. How can I build a RESTful server using Node.js and RPG? So you could set it up very much like what I was doing here and have the Express just call your RPG program to get information if necessary, if you even needed the RPG side of it anymore. But actually, it's kind of a little bit more in-depth thing, so rather than try to explain it, I would suggest going to noderun.com, and we've got examples of that stuff that you can give a try to. And we've also got stuff in our documentation. So there's a lot of stuff to that. I just don't have the time to go into it in all depth. Is there a way to directly call an RPG program? So you could do it through stored procedure calls, as you mentioned in the question. The question mentioned that stored procedure calls were one way. Another way would be as a web service, you could call it. Another way would be to use IBM's XML service. But there's nothing built into Node itself. And probably the best tool out there, if, I'm kind of tooting my own horn here, but the best tool out there that I've seen is the one that Profound provides. We've got a tool called the Profound.js connector that allows you to do this stuff. So you can call Node.js from RPG, or you can call RPG from Node.js very seamlessly with our tools. So I would definitely take a look at that if that's something that's important to you. All right, so unfortunately don't have time to answer all of the questions here. We are going to take all these questions down though, and we will send you answers to anything. So if you didn't get an answer to your question, we will make sure that we send those out to you afterwards. All right, so that's it for today. Thank you all very much for attending. Hope you enjoyed it, and if you have anything else that we can do for you, feel free to contact us, either sales@profoundlogic.com or support@profoundlogic.com for technical questions, and we'll be happy to help you out. Thank you, everyone.